Hello everybody, and welcome to video 5, I believe, chapter 4. So today I wanted to give a shout out to some friends of mine. They were neighbors up until a few years ago, and this was done by Alexis. And this one, I think this one was done by Alexis as well. Maybe this one was done by Caitlin. I think this one was Caitlin. That's Caitlin. This one was Alexis. And this one, I believe, was Alexis as well. Aren't they fun? Super colorful. Super cool. I think I'm going to frame them and put them up on the wall. I think that would be great. Fun art. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. If you're inspired to drawing a picture after you listen to the chapter, you can submit them, and then I can display them on YouTube, and I can give you credit for your art. So I wanted to just remind you some information about where you can submit the artwork to. So that's my email address, berardcristina@gmail.com, and just make sure not to put the H. It's Christina without an H. And in case you're interested in buying the book, it's available on Amazon. If you search for the author's name, Anna Christina Berard, it'll pop up right away. So that's some housekeeping that I wanted to do. The other thing I wanted to do is to review a little bit where we're up to in the story, what kinds of things have happened, and what sorts of things have we learned from it. So let's see. So far we finished chapter 3. And up to this point, Ashley has moved away from California, where she's from, away from her grandparents, and she moved to Rhode Island. And we know that she's missing her grandparents a lot. Before she left, she was talking to her grandparents, and her grandparents explained to her that even though she was moving across country, there were ways that they could keep in touch. And one of those ways is through the internet, right? So we're really lucky now that we just don't have phones. We can use Skype, we can use Zoom, we can use Facebook, we can use FaceTime, and we can actually see each other. So that's one way you can keep in touch. The other thing they said, they would be visiting during the summers. So they were, explaining to Ashley that just because she was moving away didn't mean that their relationship was going to stop, right? And sometimes that happens to us. We have relationships that we wish we could live close to people, but sometimes that's not possible. But that doesn't mean that we can't put things in place where we can still continue that relationship, and that relationship can still be continue to be very important and very special. So that's something we've learned. We've also learned that when Ashley came to Rhode Island, she met a girl who she eventually became friends with, and she was embarrassed to let her new friend Sydney know that she couldn't ride a bike. So it was embarrassing for her because Sydney was an expert and she could ride the bike like an expert. And she was having a lot of fun with it. And Ashley was a little timid to let her know that, what is she going to think of me? Is she going to make fun of me for not being able to ride a bike? So she kind of kept that secret to herself for a while until she felt she was able to trust Sydney enough, and she decided to choose to be brave and to let Sydney know what her secret was. So what happened was, once she let Sydney know what the secret was, Sydney was so excited that she took off and didn't explain why. So in that circumstances, Sydney could have handled that a little better, right? She could have told Ashley, Ashley, hold on, I'll be right back. I got to show you something, right? So then Ashley would have sat and wondered, gee, where is Sydney going? And she would have been excited, about what she had to tell her. So that's true. So Ashley could have handled things better. But also at that point, Sydney kind of jumped to conclusions. She started to assume that perhaps, Ashley jumped to conclusions thinking that Sydney was maybe, running away because she thought that perhaps, gee, this new friend of hers didn't even know how to ride a bike, and, so she just ran away. So I think that was probably in Ashley's mind, like, oh no, she took this secret that I have and she just ran away and now she's no longer my friend. So that's an assumption, and sometimes in life we make assumptions based on limited information. So we don't have all the facts. And when we jump to conclusions and make assumptions, and then we become sad or angry even, and there's really no reason for it, at least not in this case. So that's something that we learned, that eventually Ashley realized when Sydney came back that really she was just excited, and she ran down the street and she came back with a bicycle and she gave it to her, right? So she suffered with those assumptions for a little while needlessly. What else did we learn? Let's see. Okay, so those are some of the emotional aspects of the story that I think are important to keep in mind. The adventure is fun, and we'll get into that in chapters 4 more so than even we have so far. But just try to keep in mind some of the emotional things that the girls are going through, and notice if you've ever experienced anything like that and what you can learn from the story. So like I said, in chapter 4, we're going to get more into discovering what it is about the library that makes it so magical and so exciting, and why Sydney seems to like it so much. And also, just so you know, I am the author of the story, and it was inspired by my own trips with my son and my nieces to the library. So some of the things in the book are actual occurrences that happened, but some of them, is based on my imagination and what the actual physical library kind of inspired in me. And I'm sure that there's places in your own neck of the woods and where you live that perhaps inspire you. And I wonder what kind of stories you could come up with, and maybe you could write your own book with your own pictures in it. Okay, so we're going to start with chapter 4 now of Magic at the Library. And like I said before in my videos, I do live with 2 little puppies, so they may decide to show up. Depends if they're doing nap time right now or not. But if you hear barks or whatever, and we'll see if somebody wants to visit or not. So chapter 4. Sitting on a bench outside the library, we took a few minutes to go over what we had. Ashley, said Sydney, as I was drawing the maps, I noticed the grounds in some places are different to what it's like today. Different how? I asked. Sydney took out the drawing and held it so I could see. Well, in certain spots on the map, there seemed to be parts of the library that I've never seen before. I quickly jumped in. That's it. That must be a section of the library that some people claim they see. I can barely stand it, said Sydney. Let's go see what else we can find. Following the map, we headed to the gardens. There, Sydney pointed to the steps that led up to the building. See, she shouted. See, she shouted. On the map, these steps should lead to a second floor, another section of the building. Do you think it could have burned down at some point, and that's why it's no longer here? I asked. Well, that's one explanation I've heard, she said, looking puzzled, but that doesn't explain how some people have seen these very sections over the years. Plus, it's so well cared for, I said. Look at the solid black wrought iron gate and the stones the stairs are made of. They look brand new. If this place had burned down, it would have fallen to ruins over the years. Don't you think, Sydney? We slowly climbed the steps, looking around for any possible clues. There were a total of 23 stairs, each deep and wide enough to fit me and Sydney lying down head to head. As we approached the iron gate, we looked through to find nothing more than overgrown grasses and Queen Anne's lace flowers, my Nana's favorite, growing on top of the first floor of the building. Ashley, look, down over there, through those overgrown bushes on the left side of the building. I can see a path I didn't know was there. So remember, Sydney has an idea of what these grounds are like because she's been there before. She lives here, right? But she hasn't seen everything. We followed the path around the building, wiping away branches and jumping over ground cover and under small trees that had overtaken the path. Sydney was a bit ahead of me and shouted back, "Hurry, Ash, there's another set of stairs that leads up the building." We ran up the stairs, and when we reached the top, we looked at each other, confused. "There's nothing here but tall grass," said Sydney, disappointed. "This doesn't even look like a proper roof. It doesn't look like a roof at all. It's flat and covered in weeds." Curious, I asked Sydney, "Isn't that strange? Why would someone build stairs that go nowhere?" "Okay," said Sydney, "let's write down everything we've seen so we don't forget. Maybe later those books Miss Penelope showed us can answer some of our questions. Maybe we'll find old pictures of the building that might help us understand what these stairs and doors to nowhere are really for." I agree, and we continued looking for any clues. We ran down the stairs, anxious to see what else we would find. Leaving the left side of the building, we headed over to the right and came across an enormous tree with deep eggplant purple leaves. Amazed at the immensity of the tree, I ran under and said, "Sydney, come under here. It's like a purple tent of leaves and branches that swing back and forth. The branches hang so low to the ground that it's the perfect place to play hide and seek. Can you find me, Sydney?" "Marco! Polo!" shouted Sydney. The branches felt more like leather ropes dangling, and there were so many of them, it felt like we were swimming in a sea of purple. It reminded me a little of Papa. How did that remind her of Papa? Suddenly, I was daydreaming about how Papa grew grapes in his backyard and enjoyed making his own wine. In late September, he harvested all his dark purple grapes and threw them in a rectangular cement pool. Once a year, we would all gather at Papa's house, wash our legs and feet really well, and jump into the grape-filled pool to crush the grapes with our feet. It tickled a little, and the entire yard smelled like grape juice. I couldn't wait to see Nana and Papa again. I miss them so much. Finally, Sydney found me. I was close to the trunk, an immense gray trunk covered with carvings and etchings in the wood. Most of them were your usual teenager stuff. You know, I love her, she loves me, yuck. But one carving stood out. "Sydney, look, there's a carved poem into the trunk." The bark had grown around it, so it looked like it had been there for many years. It read, "She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meets in her aspect and her eyes. Thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies." "It sounds like a secret message," said Sydney. "Let me write it down. I hope we can find something about it in the books back at the library." "Sydney, I know it's getting late, but do you think we could stay a little longer? I'm so glad you feel the same way. Yes, I think we still have some time, said Sydney, clearly excited to see more. We headed toward the canopy of trees at the library's entrance at the end of the driveway. But before we reached the library was a giant, heavy brown, old wooden door with enormous cast iron door handles, or knockers. On either side was a stone wall, which divided the front lawn of the library in two. Wow, I said, these doorknobs look like they belong to a giant. Look, Sid, I can put my head through one of the handles. Sydney laughed. That looks lovely on you, she said with an English accent. That looks lovely on you. The strange thing about the door was that it didn't lead anywhere. A wall with windows stood on either side. The walls were only slightly taller than the door and only about 10 feet out to either side. The walls had a space between them, but it wasn't like a room. It was just a narrow space of air, about 4 feet deep. I guess it could have been for storage, but it was empty and there was no doorway into the space. Ashley, said Sydney, why would these walls have windows? I know. 6 stained glass windows and no doors? Strange. The big heavy door only took us from one side of the wall to the other, but it didn't let us into anything. Sydney ran quickly around the door to the other side of the door, pushed it open with all her might, and poked her head around it. This door weighs a ton, she says. It's just like the stairs that led to nothing but grass, I said. Sydney opened the heavy door even wider and walked back and forth through the doorway. Looking puzzled, she said, on one side we are outdoors, and on the other we are still outdoors. So what is the door for? Let's go back to the purple tree, I said. Maybe we missed something. I want to make sure we have everything we need before we go back home. Ashley, I am so happy I can finally share my favorite place with my best friend, said Sydney. I'm so happy you showed it to me. It's so much fun exploring it together, I said. Sydney and I went back to the tree and read the poem again, this time out loud and very carefully. As soon as we said the first words together, we started to hear a soft hum surrounding us, almost like a vibration. We both stopped talking and the hum disappeared. Ashley, did you hear that? I heard it and I felt it. Let's read it again. While we were saying the words, the hum returned and a shimmer of light came through the leaves from the left side of the library. By now the sun had set. I pushed aside the branches and we walked out toward the building. Stunned, I heard Sydney say in a low, quiet voice, "Incredible." And that is the end of chapter 4. So I wonder what they saw.